Well, we can go ahead and get started since we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and welcome to Villanova University. On behalf of the Center for Church Management, on behalf of myself, Daniel Gerton, the Associate Director, and my colleagues Matt and Chesley, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar series. This is our last session in our Money in the Church series, and we are very excited to be wrapping it up with something a little bit more quantitative to balance out some of the other types of research and type of information that you've been getting. But we're very excited to have our own Matt Manion presenting today. And our topic today is COVID-19's impact on parish giving, new benchmarks, and what we should do in 2021.
And Dan, just at the beginning too, I want to acknowledge, I know it was originally intended to be Chuck, Zech, and myself presenting today. I regret to share with you all that Chuck, unfortunately, lost his son to brain cancer last week, and he and Ann buried their son, Tom, earlier this week. So Chuck's not able to join us. I do have his research and have his permission to share the findings of his research with us all today. But I would ask for all of you who know Chuck, and even for those of you who don't, if you can please keep the Zech family in your prayers and pray, perhaps as part of our prayer intention this morning, we can remember his son Tom in our prayers and pray for the peaceful repose of his soul, please.
And certainly as we move to our opening prayer, we remember Tom. We ask that the Lord receive him into light of his face, and we ask that the Lord grant peace and consolation to his family and all those affected by his death. So today is actually the feast of St. Vincent the Deacon, who was a favorite subject of St. Augustine for his sermons. And today's Office of Reading actually features an excerpt from one of Augustine's sermons on the feast of St. Vincent. So I wanted to read part of that and then close by praying the collect for Mass today. So if you don't know much about St. Vincent the Deacon, he was the proto-martyr of Spain in the 4th century. He was executed under Emperor Diocletian and has been kind of at the center of sort of Spain's spiritual life. And as I said, a personal favorite of St. Augustine. So let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. There's no need to wonder then, my dearly beloved brothers, that Vincent conquered in him who conquered the world. Against Christ's army, the world arrays a twofold battle line. It offers temptation to lead us astray. It strikes terror into us to break our spirit. Hence, if our personal pleasures do not hold us captive, and if we are not frightened by brutality, then the world is overcome. At both of these approaches, Christ rushes to our aid, and the Christian is not conquered. If you were to consider in Vincent's martyrdom only human endurance, then his act is unbelievable from the outset. But first recognize the power to be from God, and he ceases to be a source of wonder. Almighty ever-living God, mercifully pour out your Spirit upon us, so that our hearts may possess that strong love by which the martyr St. Vincent triumphed over all bodily torments, through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the center, I imagine most of you are by now. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces and names who have joined us for this series and some of our other webinars. But just in case you're not quite familiar with the Center for Church Management provides education and scholarship in the Augustinian Catholic tradition on strategic management and temporal matters in service to leaders of churches and other Christian faith-based ministries. And our vision is to be a global resource for church management knowledge. We do this in a number of ways, one through our academic programs, through our Master of Science in Church Management, through our nonprofit programs. We have a number of certificates and work with seminarians to teach church management knowledge to all those working throughout the church and throughout other Christian faith-based ministries. And then we also promote and facilitate research and getting that research out to those who are kind of working on the front lines and can really use that and take those kind of theoretical, quantitative data points that we're getting through the research and really apply them to improve their ministry and to build up the church and the mission of the church. We are very grateful for the Lilly Endowment. We fund these webinars in part through the National Initiative to Address Economic Challenges Facing Pastoral Leaders. These seminars are also funded by the generosity of our benefactors. So we're very grateful for all those who enable us to do our mission of helping others do their mission. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chesley Turner, who is the director of the Center for Church Management, to introduce our presenter today.
Thank you so much, Dan. It is wonderful to have this this time with you all this morning. Thanks for being here. I see a lot of familiar names and faces from our many different programs. So thank you for coming to participate with us today. Hope you have some good things to learn and some action items to take away. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker and my colleague. But first, I wanted to, even in absentia, introduce Dr. Chuck Zech, whose good work is used in this presentation. Dr. Zech is a professor emeritus at Villanova School of Business, and he is the founder of the Center for Church Management here, which he founded back in 2004. Dr. Zech is author or co-author of 55 articles and 13 books simply on the topic of church management. And it is because of his good work and his legacy that we are gathered here today. So of course we keep Chuck and his family and his son especially in our thoughts. And we are grateful. We find some gratitude for the good things that he has put into the world. And then I would like to introduce my colleague, Professor Matt Manion. Matt is a professor of practice in our Department of Management and Operations at the Villanova School of Business. And he is also faculty director for our Center for Church Management. And that includes overseeing our Master of Science in Church Management degree, which is part of the #3 ranked online graduate business program, ranked by US News and World Report. We're very proud of that, proud of our students, proud of our faculty, and proud of the good work that we do. Matt also oversees our certificate in church management programs and our certificate in Catholic school management programs, and does a significant amount of research and writing on relevant church management issues. You might have seen him recently in interviewed in New York Times, Washington Post, even the BBC. And prior to joining Villanova, Matt had boots on the ground, we'll say, right? Matt was at Catholic Leadership Institute for 18 years, serving as president and CEO. So just with that insight of really understanding the nuts and bolts of what our managers of churches are facing, that is what he brings to his work and his research today. And so with that, I am most pleased to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Matt Manion, to give us some hope. We need some hope today, Matt. So tell us more about COVID-19 parish impact and really those strategies we can use in 2021.
Thank you so much, Chesley, and thank you all for spending time here this afternoon with us, and for those who spent time over these past several weeks with us. And I see a number of my colleagues from the faculty, so grateful for all of them for the great work they continue to do through the Center for Church Management, through the Villanova School of Business, and also see a number of our advisory council members and benefactors here. So continue, as Dan said, we're so grateful for the way that you assist us in fulfilling this important mission. And for all those folks who are doing this great work, it's a pleasure to offer this. And hopefully we'll give you some new insights, perhaps give you some benchmarks to compare how your church is doing. And more importantly, we've got some great strategies that we think can be helpful as we head into 2021.
And Matt, I'm sorry, I just want to jump right back in with some logistics for today.
Yes.
We do have some new people. So this is a Zoom meeting, but for intents and purposes, if you have any questions at any point, please submit them through the chat. We ask that you limit the chat box to questions for the presenter or for one another, and not have side conversations in the chat box for this presentation. A reminder that the recording will be available. So if you miss something, you want to review it, or you want to show it to a friend, a colleague, a donor, this will be available, and Dan will send that out afterwards. And we will have stoppage time. So at the 2 o'clock hour, we respect your time, and we will come to a soft close at 2 o'clock. But Matt graciously agreed to stay on, so we will continue to take questions after that point if we still have continuing questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Chesley. Yeah, I'll do my best. It should take about 35 minutes to get through this presentation, which should give us hopefully 15 minutes or so for some Q&A with the large group as well, before we officially end at 2 o'clock. But I think there is good news in here. So we believe there are benchmarks in here. We believe there's relevant data for you. that's in here. And as Dan kind of said, for those who've been with us for the past 2 weeks, we started off with 2 practitioners with Tom Corcoran and Father Michael White. And then we went to a scholar who's more on the qualitative side with Maureen Day's excellent presentation last week on Latinx giving and stewardship frames. Chuck and I kind of skew a little bit more to the quantitative side of things, but all of it's all for the greater glory of God. And so, the research we'll be sharing with you today is based on a study that my colleague Alicia Strandberg and I did in the fall. And so that'll be the first half of the presentation. And then the second half of the presentation will be based on research that Dr. Chuck Zech did. And so we use that combo together to get us through everything. And so I would say at the outset, though, that kind of what we're looking at here, we wanted to do a study of the impact of COVID-19 on Catholic parishes. And I know we've got people from a variety of different faith traditions here. I will share a little data from one of our colleagues at the Lake Institute, David King, did on impact of COVID-19 on other congregations. But the core of the stuff that I'll present in the first half is based on this study that we did of annual offertory from 169 parishes. And we took a look at 4 years worth of data. So we wanted to see how COVID-19 and how fiscal year 20 was different than the prior 4 years. Make sure it wasn't just a continuation of a trend, but to see if there are any differences. And you'll see there were. What we realized was the impact of COVID-19 on parish collections could be devastating, but it doesn't have to be. It was not everywhere, which is exciting for us. And fundamentally, parishes still have time, even though we're 9 months into this pandemic, parishes still have time to pivot to a new model of being church before the economic impact is irreversible. But that time is running out. But if parishes can focus on mission and on accountability and transparency, there still is lots of room to make changes and still to turn things around if your parish has not gotten fully where you want it to be yet, or your church has not. So in designing the survey to study these 169 Catholic parishes, we had 3 hypotheses that we wanted to test. So one, we had a belief that parishes that live streamed their masses or services during the pandemic, our hypothesis was that they would see minimal or no drop in collections. As we'll see, live streaming did have a positive impact. It didn't completely eliminate the drop, but the drop was not as severe for the parishes that did it. We thought that parishes that used online giving before the pandemic would have less of a drop in collections than parishes that did not offer this. Again, there was a slight understanding there, but actually everyone's pretty much has online collections now, so we'll talk through that. And then the general thing was our hypothesis that parishes that did not use online giving or live stream masses will struggle financially to survive the pandemic, particularly after the PPP, the CARES Act money runs out. And the data would certainly seem to bear that third hypothesis out if things don't change. But as we said, there is still time to change. So we want to take a look at this 4-year trend. This is the aggregate of all these parishes, or 166 of the parishes. 3 of them are missing data from 1 year. But as you can see, the parish collections were relatively stable for a 3-year period. They were plus 1%, down 1%, but they were relatively stable, averaging $660,000 per parish per year in this. And they're from very small parishes with $100,000 in offertory to very large parishes with $2.5 million a year in annual offertory and everywhere in between. But after 3 years of relatively stable collections, in fiscal year 20, there was a significant drop of 7% for this whole population size. So COVID-19 clearly did have a unique impact, which is not surprising, just the data bore it out. And that 7% could lead to a potential 24% decline for parishes in fiscal year 21, because the bulk of that drop occurred after churches shut down, as you all know, on March 15th. And so if that current rate of giving continues through fiscal year 21, the decline will be 24% for this year. And for those who have children preparing for the SATs, it's just the simple math. 7% is to 15 weeks, as 24% would be to 52 weeks. And so if it is a 24% decline on average across all these churches, that will have significant impact on these churches. It will most likely lead to layoffs, lead to some church closures, and perhaps most significantly, it will decrease the amount of ministry that is being done by these churches and the good people in these churches. And so we don't want to have that happen. So overall, it was not shocking, but not a great story. But as we dug into the data further, it was interesting. And part of the hope was that not every parish had collections decline. And some of you may be in those, but we're very pleased to see that 1 out of 6 parishes actually had collections increase in fiscal year 20. And that's similar to the work that's mentioned by David King did, is similar to the research from the Lake Institute when they did their congregational study. But for the Catholic parishes in that group, they similarly had 16% who reported that collections had increased. So that is good news. The bad news is there's a huge chunk of these, and it was 20% of this particular population, or 36 churches, who had collections go down by more than 14%. And when you project that out, that's talking about a decline year over year. That would be a full year decline of a 50% drop in collections. And a 50% drop in collections would be catastrophic for most churches that are out there. It'd be very difficult. It would require a radical change in restructuring in order to continue operations, and could potentially lead to, as we said, the risk of closures there. I think there is one other piece, just to, again, put the Catholic stuff in context with others, and this is using the Lake Institute study. But it was interesting because in the Lake Institute study, of all the congregations that they looked at, and there was a sample size of, I think, 500 churches, 52% of them reported an increase in collections in fiscal year 20. And 41% of them reported a decline. The rest were kind of flat year over year. So that was overall the congregations they looked at. It was interesting, in the Catholic parishes within that same subset, that same population, only 16%, as I said, reported an increase, and 61% reported a decline. So where in the whole population set, it was 41% reported a decline. Among the Catholic churches, it was 61%. So there was a struggle, which is, again, giving has generally been lower for Catholic parishes than it has been for some of our other brothers and sisters. But just looking at this chart, the fact that some did well, some were kind of in the middle, and some really struggled, it begged the question for us from a research perspective as to, well, what is the difference? And kind of what were the drivers behind it? Are there certain things? Was it that, suburban parishes did better than urban parishes? Is it bigger parishes weathered this better than smaller parishes? So we took a look and sliced and diced the data by all those things, and it actually had some fairly interesting results for us. So the next couple of charts are all going to look the same. And so I'll just explain to you briefly how to interpret the charts. But the top half of the chart is the average collections for fiscal year 20 compared to the average collections for fiscal year 19. And we did consciously do this to say, like, take that first column there, for example. So the mega parishes, collections were 96% of what they were in fiscal year 19. They were 96% in fiscal year 20 of what they were the year before. And that was a conscious choice for us to say that they were 96% of what they were, as opposed to saying they were down 4%. Because we do think it's important to celebrate and build upon the fact that 96% of the money still came in. So what can we learn from those people who are continuing to contribute, and how can we multiply and build on that generosity and grow it to others? So that's what you're going to have at the top of each of these charts, is the percent change year over year. And then the bottom is just the average for that particular demographic for fiscal year 20. So the mega parishes had an average collection of $1,923,000 as an example for reading it. So they'll all be the same on how you read it. And so what do we learn from it? So the first thing that we learned that was interesting is that parish size does not explain the differences between the parishes that did well and the parishes that did not. And there was no correlation between parish size and the drop in collections. You can see, it was really interesting to us, this group of lower mid-sized parishes. And so again, we did size, as you can see by the chart there, based on what the annual offertory collections were. So small parishes had less than $250,000 in offertory collections. Mega parishes had more than 1.25 million in collections, and you have the other demographics there. But we found it fascinating that, sure, the mega parishes did a little better, but these lower mid-sized parishes, the ones between 250 and 500,000, actually were the next best performing as an overall group. So where we had expected this to maybe decline from the biggest to the smallest, that's not what happened. And in fact, when we did the regression analysis, parish size was not statistically significant in explaining the differences between parishes. So if that didn't matter, the next question was does the type of parish matter? So did suburban versus urban versus rural versus seasonal parishes? And in the sample size, we had Fall River, Massachusetts, that had Cape Cod. We had Camden, New Jersey, which had South Jersey, and we had Raleigh, North Carolina, which also has a number of seasonal beach parishes in it. And interestingly, parish type did not matter. So the rural parishes did a little better than the other ones, but again, the differences here were not statistically significant. And we should note, as we say there, those seasonal parishes did not include July and August collections. I imagine they probably got hurt significantly in those, but that was not available at the time of this study. So we would see there. The next ones took a look at, so if it wasn't the parish size and if it wasn't the parish type, we thought, well, what's the impact of if a parish has a school? Is that going to help or hurt them? And the answer is it makes no difference at all. So that was not a driver of things. And the null ones there, the gray column, are just the ones who did not report whether they had a school or not. But for the ones that did, they had 93% of collections versus 92% of collections, so basically a wash. We wanted to know if the geography mattered. As we said, we had those 3 different dioceses. And while Raleigh, North Carolina did a little better than the others, again, when we ran the whole data, it was not a statistically significant difference. So there was a difference, but not one statistically. And then one of our hypotheses was how much e-giving mattered. So we talked about that. And parishes with e-giving did decline less than parishes that did not have e-giving. You can see it's 93% versus 89% year over year. That difference wasn't statistically significant only because 91% of the parishes in this study offered e-giving. So our take on that is that e-giving is a must-have at this point. It's kind of permission to play for parish life anymore. So if you happen to be part of in this study would have been 9%, but if you happen to be part of a parish that does not yet have it, we really would encourage. And part of it is, and it builds a bit off of what even our friends at Nativity said in the first session, but when people pass around the collection basket when we're in person, when that used to be the case pre-COVID, it was easy to make a donation. We made it easy. We literally put the basket in our laps for people to make their donation. So for those that still use cash or checks, it was easy. And so I think with e-giving, the learnings were we have to make it easy for people to do that as well. And so if the online setup is hard or is challenging, figure out a way, work with your vendor, make it as smooth and as simple as possible. And I think the big insight, again, just check with your vendor. If you don't offer text giving as a way for people to give electronically, you absolutely should. You're taking away an opportunity for people who want to support you. You're taking away one of the common ways that is done, particularly amongst younger generations. And so as Tom and Father Michael shared, work with your vendor, but most of them, if they offer electronic giving, can also give you the capacity to assume text giving as well. So yes, you have to have it. It did make a difference because 90% of the people did have it already. So if none of those things mattered, the good news is we did find one behavior that was a significant difference. And the biggest difference was whether parishes offered online mass or not. And so from an overall standpoint, the drop was they had 95% of prior year versus 88% of prior year. So a 7-point spread in there between those that offered online mass and those that don't. But perhaps even more significantly, that leads to a 20-point difference when you project that what happened from March 15th to June 30th over the full 52 weeks. So if you don't offer online mass, you're leaving potentially 20% of your collection. You're missing out on it from people who would want to be engaged with you. So out of this data set, the good news is 72% of the parishes in this data set, 121 out of the 169, did offer some form of online mass. And they're great stories of what that happened. And those of you that offer online mass are probably aware of it, or those of you that attend online mass are probably aware of it, but it expands your parish footprint, your church footprint, and you can reach people who perhaps you've never reached before. One of the top performing parishes in this study, Father Chris Peschel's parish, Our Lady of Grace up in Westport, Massachusetts. But Father Chris was sharing the story with us that, he's a small rural parish and they have annual collections before of $164,000 a year. So not a huge parish. But in fiscal year 20, their collections actually grew from 164,000 to over to 225,000, I think was the final number. So it was a big chunk of growth for them. I mean, it was a big chunk of growth. And so, but he shared the story that I'm sure many of you have seen, but out of the blue one day, he got a check in the mail for $1,000 with a letter from somebody who lived across the country. It wasn't even in Massachusetts, but was searching for different masses, came across this mass online, really liked the message, really liked the general tone and the outreach of the parish, and decided he wanted to continue to support the good work that they're doing. And the guy now gives $1,000 a month to the parish, which is huge in a parish of that size. So yeah, online mass certainly allows us to reach a bigger footprint, and the potential 20-point difference in collections. I mean, there's a lot of business managers on here, but that's pretty simple math. If you got 200 grand a year in collections, you're talking about $40,000 potentially that could be left on the table if you offered online mass. If you're a bigger parish, you got $1 million in collection, you're talking about $200,000 that could be left off the table if you don't offer this option. So there might be an investment to switch to online, to switch to live streaming. but the return on that investment from greater engagement with your people and the financial return on it is significant. And we think as we talked through the parishes that did this, part of what we discovered was that the shift to online mass versus e-giving revealed in the handful that we spoke to, it revealed a missionary impulse, to use the words of Pope Francis, but they had a missionary impulse to figure out how can we continue the mission differently in light of the restrictions in COVID. And if you think about it, offering online giving is nice, and we should do that. That's a must-have. But all online giving is if I'm the parish and I offer you online giving, then I'm saying, okay, parishioner, yes, here's an easier way for you to continue to support me, your parish. And that should be there and must be there. But to shift to offering online mass, or even better, to live streaming mass, that's me, parish, saying, I'm going to do the way I do church differently in order to be able to reach you during these difficult times. So I'm changing what I do to continue to stay in relationship with you, to continue to serve you, to continue to minister to you. And we think that reveals, as we talk to them, there are a lot of other things they were doing to continue that missionary impulse and to reach out to their persons, whether it was making a phone call to all their parishioners with some frequency just to check in, whether it's moving to Bible studies and prayer groups online, whether it was a number of pastors started recording just short, 3-4 minute videos that they would blast out to all their parishioners to keep the relationship there, particularly for those who did not feel comfortable coming back to worship in person. And so it's a huge piece of it. And moving from just pre-recorded masses to live stream masses and allowing people to have that same time, the sense of community at one, still offering the recordings later, but the live streaming versus the pre-recorded does seem to have this anecdotal evidence that that is even more effective in connecting with people. And for those of you that are doing live stream, just a very small tip, but they suggest that, making sure that you connect with the people who are also worshiping alongside you from home. So to literally address them, there's, for those that have children in grade school, I sometimes hear where they're doing the hybrid, half the classes in person and half the classes at home. But I've heard some teachers using the teaching technique. They'll say, okay, this question's for all of our Zoomers, and this question's for all of our roomers. So that they acknowledge that there are some people in the room and some people watching on Zoom. But I think the same mentality. And so there can be a handful of times during your liturgies where you can say, we welcome all those who are joining us from home, and we pray together with those who are joining us from home. And for those who are Catholic, the prayer of spiritual communion, acknowledging it's for the people who are worshiping remotely. Those things draw them in and make them feel a great part of the community. So if you have not moved to online mass and to live streaming masses, there is still time, but do that. You'll reach more people. You'll reach the people who do not feel comfortable coming to church, as well as potentially reaching some folks who would never have considered your church before. And one other small tip to do that a number of places, and you probably may be doing this in many of your places too, if you offer the live stream option, you may want to consider offering the live stream option and offering distribution of communion after Mass. So there will be people who will watch the live stream on their phones sitting in their cars, but they're not comfortable coming inside and being a part of a crowd, or because of health reasons, it's not safe for them to come inside and be part of a crowd, but they still would like to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. So we see a number of places where they'll have a station dedicated after church for those who watch the live stream to come for a brief communion service and still have the chance to receive the Eucharist. So again, it's that missionary impulse, that creativity to say, we're going to change the way we do things in order to serve you in light of the realities in which we are serving today. And so just financially, the cost of not doing this, we talked about the 24% decline in collections. And I know some people here are involved at the diocesan level, not just at a local parish level. But it is, the potential of not shifting is huge. And just doing the math, we're talking about the $1.6 billion dilemma within the Catholic Church in the United States. And that's simply just doing the projection. These 169 parishes serve approximately 1 million of the roughly 77 million Catholics in the United States. Their total collections were $103 million. So they kind of are, while they are not representative of the US by any means, because they're all East Coast churches, their mix of suburban, urban, rural, and seasonal is fairly representative. And they have a mix of different ethnicities and everything else. And so if you were to assume they were representative, acknowledging they're not, but if we assume they were, and they represented 65 million Catholics in the US, which is kind of one of the numbers that's out there, and you assume the 24% year-over-year decline, then total US Catholic collections would drop from $6.6 billion, which is a fairly common estimate, to roughly $5 billion. So that means there's $1.6 billion that the Catholic Church would not have available to fulfill her mission, that could not be used to share the good news of Jesus Christ, that could not be used to feed the hungry and to clothe the naked and to visit the sick and to bury the dead and to educate and all the other things that are part of the church's mission. So it's huge, and we can't have that happen. And I think part of the risk and part of what we hope you do, and this is kind of shift into the second half of it, is that I don't think a lot of people are aware of the impact on collections in many parishes. And so, and part of that is because of the good work of the CARES Act. So in this population, 80% of the parishes in the study received payroll protection loans from the government in Q4 of fiscal year 20, in the spring of last year. And those loans ran generally through mid to late October. And so on the positive side, it kept people employed. It funded parish operations. It did the things that the PPP loans were expected to do for churches, just as they did the same things and had the same positive goods that many small businesses had from the PPP loans. The downside from a church perspective is that the pain in the decline in collections has not been felt by many people in the pews. So they may have felt the personal pain of the economic impact of COVID if they lost their jobs or had reductions in their salaries. But from a church perspective, there's many congregations where the PPP loans did what they did, but masked for many people or hid from many people the actual reality of what the financial situation is. And when that PPP money runs out, a lot of parishes could be in a lot of trouble. So there is absolutely, one of the key findings from this is that there is a need to communicate clearly and transparently the financial reality to your people, whatever it may be. So your parish collections may be up, your parish collections may be down, whatever it might be, but it's really critical that your people know what's going on. And for those who were with us last week, when Dr. Maureen Day shared the stuff on stewardship frames of Latinx giving, one of her key findings was that most people didn't think the church needs my money. And so in a research in the Hispanic community, that was kind of the mindset, particularly those who came from Mexico, because it was funded differently there. So they thought the church has money, doesn't need my money. While I was chuckling as she was sharing that, I was like, well, that's not a uniquely Hispanic perspective in America. There are many people who think the church has plenty of money and doesn't need my money. And for those involved in church management, we know that's not true. And so the church doesn't have any money that wasn't given to it by some of its people. And so to educate them, and for many of you right now, I mean, you probably have your first half results for fiscal year 21. So you have your July through December results, you have your Christmas collections in. Now is the time when you should be going out to people and sharing with them whatever the financial reality of your parish is. And if you haven't had that schedule already, figure out a way to communicate that, to get the information so everyone knows. And it really kind of shifts, and this is where the second half, I'm going to shift to my colleague Chuck Zech's great research, and he did some of this with Bob West too. I'm not sure if Bob's with us today, but a combination of their work. But looking at accountability and transparency is really key. So you have to have a missionary impulse and be willing to change the way you do ministry. And you also have to have accountability and transparency in order to be able to weather the COVID storm financially for your parishes. So we'll just offer these two definitions. Accountability is an obligation or willingness by an organization to explain its actions to its stakeholders. And transparency is an obligation or a willingness by an organization to make available critical data about the organization. So there's both halves of this that we're going to talk about and share some ideas and share some strategies for it. But yes, we have to be willing to explain why we do what we do, and we have to share the data, the critical data about our churches with our people. And so there's a couple of reasons why it's important. We'll start with preventing a negative. And so you want to avoid the negative. And I think in particular, without accountability and transparency, I think there is a great risk of embezzlement and stealing from our churches. And so because of COVID restrictions, a lot of the typical financial controls that churches have had in place are being fulfilled differently. And so again, I don't know what the reality is for your church, but if you think of the way that collections are normally counted, best practice for counting collections is to have teams of counters and to rotate those teams week after week. And so if you're used to having whatever it might be, 4 people counting the collection in a conference room every Sunday afternoon, well, you can't do that during COVID times, or it'd be very difficult to do that safely. So you have to find out ways to do it. But many parishes, in response to that, have, instead of having a team of 4 counters, have gone down to, we'll just let one person who's been counting for a long time doing it. I'm not saying these people are untrustworthy, but it's the lack of the financial controls increases one piece of this, which is the opportunity for theft or for embezzlement to happen. The other thing that Chuck's research and other research has found is that there's really two drivers of embezzlement. So one is opportunity, and when there's lack of transparency and accountability, the opportunity to steal grows up. So whether it's the counters, whether it's the financial reports, whether it's the meetings of the finance councils, if those things aren't happening the way they did pre-COVID, the opportunity for theft increases. And the other half of it is the need. So where need plus opportunity, that leads to the risk for embezzlement. And the need for someone to steal is usually because they're in economic distress. And so again, from Chuck's research in church management, I think out of the, if I remember correctly, they took a look at, I believe it was 78 dioceses that they surveyed. And of those 78 dioceses, 85% had reported cases of embezzlement within the prior 5 years. So you'd like to think that everyone works for the church is trustworthy, but they're human and they fall prey to the same challenges others do. And the need is often driven by an addiction that puts them in economic distress. So whether it's an addiction to gambling and they can't pay their debts, whether it's addiction to drugs or alcohol and they can't afford it, but there's some addiction that causes economic pressure. So that's the source of the need. You combine that with the opportunity, and that increases the risk of embezzlement. And whether it's because of loneliness, whether it's because of separation, whether it's because of financial pressures, because of job loss, there is greater need, as we know, during this pandemic. So we have to be on guard against it. And depending on what financial controls we've had to relax in the interest of health and safety, there could be greater opportunity. So the observation there is just be careful and do what you have to do to keep people safe and keep your parish safe, but realize that we are at risk from a financial standpoint of potential greater theft happening. I would tell you from my home parish, it was not a theft issue, but it spoke to how things can relax. We shifted our online giving vendor over the summer. And so we got better rates with one, and so shifted from one vehicle platform to another. And the assumption among most parishioners who had been giving electronically, and it was over 40% of our parish gave electronically, so it was a big chunk of our collections, was that they would just be transitioned over automatically to the new system. And this happened in the summertime when many of those folks were not in their normal routines. The reality was they didn't transition over automatically. They had to be switched over and had to take action. Each person had to take individual action to resubmit their stuff through the new system. And because the normal controls, the normal reports, the normal people were not in place over the summer because of the changes during COVID, collections, while they were up fiscal year 20 over fiscal year 19, so they were part of that 16% of parishes that had collections up. As we moved into the first quarter of this fiscal year, collections were down significantly. They were down 14%. So the trend, which had been up in the first part of the pandemic, suddenly went down in the next quarter and dropped from 207,000 to 178,000. And our pastor puts all this stuff on the website, so anyone can go take a look at these numbers. But so it was a question of kind of like, what's going on here? Because we're doing the things we should be doing to keep people engaged, yet our collections are dropping. And the long and the short of it was a significant chunk of people who were electronic givers did not move over to the new system. And it wasn't caught for 3 months because our typical financial controls and financial meeting were not happening because of COVID. So just be careful. It was not theft. And when people were made aware of it, people made up the missed time and the misgivings that were there because it was part of their plan to give that money to the church anyway. But it's just an example of how without the normal controls in place, we could have significant troubles. So beware of them on the negative side is why transparency and accountability is important. But more importantly, on the positive side, it is part of what we're supposed to do as church. And so we talk about the call to co-responsibility, as Pope Benedict famously said, but we need to move from this idea of collaboration to co-responsibility of the clergy and laity for the being and action of the church. And so again, it's part of the great research that Chuck did on his work on stewardship and parish giving, but only 53% of Catholic parishioners felt they had enough information about parish finances, compared to 75% of the Protestant congregation members that were surveyed. And when Catholics, so this is geared towards the Catholics in the audience, but I think it's good information for all of us, but the Catholic parishioners who thought they had enough information contributed 32% more than those that didn't. And so you kind of see that the average giving there is that in that chart, but they contribute $1,100 a year compared to $836 for those who did not. So accountability and transparency helps people be more informed about parish finances and leads to greater generosity. It's also related to if they have the information, if they have the critical data about the parish, then they can respond more effectively. And so, the perceived influence that lay folks have, or the level of influence they believe they have on parish finances, as you can see there, only 48% of Catholic parishioners felt they had enough influence on parish finances, compared to 2/3 of Protestant congregation members. So for our Protestant brothers and sisters on this call, do a much better job of keeping people informed of what's going on, particularly their congregation members. But again, the benefit of that from a Catholic perspective, those who thought they had enough influence on how things go contributed 26% more than those who did not. So how can we foster accountability and transparency in support of the mission? So certainly share the budget at the end of the fiscal year. And we would say specifically, share the budget at the midpoint in the fiscal year in this pandemic. And show the budgeted versus actual expenditures and revenues, what you thought would happen. Share the story, give context to it. Don't just give numbers, but help people make sense of the data. In the research that Chuck did a couple years ago, 41% of Catholic parishes actually shared their budget at the end of the fiscal year and reported back to the people, here's what our actual versus our budget was. So 41% did, 59% did not. So more than half did not do that. Of the ones who did share their budgets on the website, they on average had 13% more giving than those that did not. Allow for input into decision-making. So as you move into the budgeting cycle for next fiscal year, which many of you will start doing over the next couple of months, do whatever you can, offer the preliminary budget once the first draft is done. But if you can have a chance for people to comment on the preliminary budget, to give feedback on the preliminary budget, when they see the priorities, when they understand where the parish is going. So whether you do that in a Zoom format or do that in a video, whatever it might be, but having some input allows people to feel like they have greater influence over the parish finances, which leads to greater generosity. Again, from that earlier study, only 14% of the parishes actually had all the congregation members have an opportunity to have input into the preliminary budget. Doesn't mean they made the decisions, they just offered their feedback. But of the ones that did, their collections were 29% higher. So allowing people to have influence, we know pays off. I think being prepared and willing to explain why the church is doing what it's doing is huge. And so people, in the absence of that information, they will make stuff up as to why the church is doing what it's doing. And oftentimes that can lead to misinformation and poor decision-making. And so, and I'll give an example of that in just a second, but a classic one of a parish that, and Anne-Marie Gavin may even be on this call today. So, but some great work that she did. Just last two things from an accountability and transparency, particularly at all times, but particularly in COVID, requires supporting documentation from everyone. So don't process payments, don't process bills without having the appropriate supporting document. That's how a lot of embezzlement happens, because they come up with fake documentation or submit invoices or submit fake invoices without receipts. So just require that of everyone across the board. It's a great way to prevent embezzlement. And then be really clear about the conflict of interest guidelines from a transparency standpoint. So it is okay for the parish to give business to parishioners as long as everyone knows about it and it's on board. So whether it's doing some of the maintenance work or doing some of the electrical work or doing some of the computing work, all that can go to parishioners as long as it's clear and it's out there and there are no conflicts of interest, or if they are, they're publicly shared. So just one quick anecdote on the benefits of fostering accountability and transparency that happened during COVID. But one of the parishes actually in this study in Camden, New Jersey, and as I said, if Anne-Marie's here, she deserves great credit for her leadership in it. She's one of our MSCM graduates. But the parish had 2 years of declining collections. So it wasn't just one, but their collections, they were running about, and this is all out there, they were running it looked like about $750,000 a year in collections, and had dropped $50,000 and then dropped another $50,000 during the COVID. So they had a $100,000 decline over a 2-year period. And at the end of the fiscal year, they were in a cash crunch. I mean, they had $58,000 or $56,000 in unpaid bills and debt, and the collections were down significantly. So the parish leadership appropriately said, we have to take austerity measures. We can't run at this rate and survive. So they were paying a salary to a parochial vicar. They said, we're going to have to eliminate that and lose our parochial vicar, our assistant priest that's here. They went through all the staff there and said, we're going to have to do significant cutbacks on hours and even eliminate some positions and have some layoffs, and went through just all the cuts in ministry they'd have to do in order to be able to keep the parish financially viable. But before implementing them, they said, we deserve, and our people deserve to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so at every Mass before this stuff was implemented, they had recorded a video and recorded a presentation and shared, here's what our situation is. Here's what our financial reality is. We've been hit hard by COVID. We've had other challenges and we can't go on. So as a result, if things don't change, we're going to have to do this, 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 and this. And they outlined all the things and what the impact would be on their ministry. And the response, they were blessed in that case, but the response from the people were, we had no idea. So thank you for sharing this with us. And how can we help? And people stepped up their generosity, and thank God, because of the generous response of the people, because they knew and they had the ability to respond generously, they not only were able to keep their parochial vicar and keep everyone employed, so there were no layoffs, they saved all the jobs, they were able to keep doing the ministry that they had been doing, but the people actually exceeded their prior generosity, and collections increased $3,000 per week. This is a parish running, kind of $12,000, $13,000 a week in collections. They increased $3,000 a week, and I've continued at that level through the fall because there was accountability and transparency in support of the mission. So maybe just kind of 2 slides to finish it up. At Villanova, our core values are Unitas, Veritas, and Caritas. We have a commitment to community, we have a commitment to the truth, and we have a commitment to love and caring for one another. And Father Kevin DePrinzio, who's our Vice President of Mission and Ministry, has been sharing that during COVID, we've actually added a 4th core value, which you can all share, and that's the value of pivotas. And so we've had to pivot in the way that we do education, in the way that we fulfill our mission as a university, in order to continue to carry out the work of doing the education of our students in a way that is safe and complies and keeps students and our faculty and staff and everyone else involved with us safe and healthy, but does not compromise the mission. So we had to find different ways of doing it. And I'm sure many of you have already pivoted. And that's really the closing call to all of you, is what are the ways you're being continued to call to pivot because of the economic realities of COVID-19? And how can you do things differently to still fulfill the mission in light of the challenges you may have? And how can you increase the accountability and transparency so your people can be generous for the cause of it? So the key insights from all these studies, we would say we might give you 5 to take away. So one is just to know the collections can go up. It's not a given because of the challenge of the pandemic that your collections will go down. There's plenty of evidence of parishes where that's not been the case. That could be the case for you. And those parishes are big and small, they're rich and poor, they're all different geographies, and collections can go up. The second one is, yes, please offer online Mass and offer live streaming Mass if you're not doing it already. Minimally make that shift in how you connect with your people and continue to engage those who are not comfortable or not able to come to Mass in person or worship in person, whatever your tradition may be. Reach out to people. So again, that shift from not just how you can support the church, but how the church is going to continue to be active and present in your lives. Phone calls, Zoom meetings, other things, but how can we engage people in spite of whatever challenges we might have in terms of being safe and socially distant in the world today? Share the financial realities, whatever it is. Be open and transparent with your people. Have them be involved in what's going on, and together you can help fulfill the priorities, the pastoral priorities, the spiritual priorities of your parish. And through it all, just continue to be bold and courageous. That is our role model there in the picture, is Jesus vulnerable on the cross. And so let's be vulnerable, let's be self-sacrificing, and let's be bold and courageous in our sharing of our faith and of the mission. And with that, I will stop the official presentation point and open it up for whatever questions or observations might come from the room.
Excellent. Matt, thank you so much for taking us through that and excellent work covering all of Chuck's insights as well. Thank you for that. We did have a handful of questions come in, and I'll just take this moment to remind everyone, if you'd like to submit a question, please feel free to do so through the chat, and then I will relay to Matt. And so, Matt, I'm going to start with softball, for context for the information that you presented. Can you define collections as to what that specifically refers to?
Yeah, so we did, just for purpose of consistency, it was just the offertory collections. So this was not survey data. This was the actual parish collections as reported through their financial systems to their diocese. So there is a line for the offertory collections. So it doesn't put in special collections. It doesn't put in festivals and carnivals. It doesn't put in estate givings. It's just the money that's typically given on Sundays in the offertory. Okay. So which we know for Catholic parishes is usually 75 to 80% of their annual revenue.
Great. Thank you for that insight.
Good clarification.
So we did, and I will say we did have a couple questions about other faith communities. So in the chat, Dan and I posted the link to the Lake Institute's findings, which has a little more into non-Christian communities. But I guess we like to benchmark ourselves, Matt. So any other insight into what we can learn from our Christian brothers and sisters?
I mean, I think the general insight, and this goes back to the great work that Chuck did. So for those who are Catholic and are interested in looking benchmarks for other traditions, I would say if you haven't seen Zech's books on why Catholics don't give and what can be done about it, get that book. It's outstanding. But I think there are a couple fundamentals which were in that part from Chuck's presentation. So one is the transparency about the situation. And so having churches be clear about it, those that do that, it leads to more giving and generosity. I think the other biggest change, and this goes back to a bit of some of the stuff that Tom and Father Michael spoke about in the first session, but there's an expectation that's more explicit in some other Christian traditions than there is in Catholicism about the role of money and discipleship and the role of generosity and discipleship. So there's an expectation. The concept of the biblical tithe is an expectation in a lot of traditions that is not in other traditions, and where that expectation is given, and it's just kind of like, look, this is part of what it means to be a Christian. People tend to give more. So yeah, in general, I think if I remember the data, and Chuck's data would have it in the book better, but I think like the average Catholic gave 1.2% of their income in pre-COVID times to the church. The average Protestant member gave 2.2%. And then evangelicals and Mormons and others kind of gave up in the 8-9%. So I think it's setting the expectations. And I think more importantly, as we said in the first session, it's connecting people's generosity to their discipleship and realizing it's part of, and talking about money and helping people realize how that part plays in their overall spirituality.
Great. Well, I love that segue too, because a question we've gotten a number of times is the studies that you were referring, Chuck's studies specifically that you were referring to. What are they? Where are they? How can people find them? So can you repeat the name of his book again for people to hear?
Yeah, so the one big book on it is Why Catholics Don't Give and What Can Be Done on It. And there's a couple others that were published in shorter studies as well as in other books. So what we'll do, you'll all get a link next week with a copy of this recording. And you'll also, within that link, we'll also include a copy of this PowerPoint. I'll add a slide at the end of the PowerPoint with the names of all the key books and the works for Chuck studies as well.
That is a great idea. So the next questions that are coming at you, Matt, are dig a little more into the reason why. And I really loved in the presentation how you mentioned that having an online streaming mass is not like the magic bullet. It's indicative of an entire attitude towards how do we get out? How do we reach people? So you could remove the word online and say, how do we have an accessible mass? How do we have an accessible spiritual experience? So with that in mind, but specifically looking at collections, there are a lot of different audiences out there that we are asking to be generous stewards to the church. So Christy Johnson says 60% of our parishioners give online, but we haven't been successful getting the younger generation to give, specifically in that online format. Any other ideas, any other things, or even pitches to reach the younger generation?
Yes, I think it is two-part. And it was interesting as we talked to some of the parishes that really had significant increases in collections. So it did speak to the missionary impulse and the creativity about the work of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ has to continue. We can't do it the way we were used to doing it, but we still have to do it. And the gospel compels us. They kind of had that mindset of St. Paul, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. So it was interesting. I would just tell you anecdotally in talking to a couple of these pastors, but the first two that we talked to, both had the same opening line. We said, kind of, what did you do during the pandemic? And they both used it. The first thing they said was, we never closed. So even though we couldn't do mass in person, we kept our churches open. We put in clear guidelines about social distancing, but our house of prayer, God's house, was still open for people to come to pray, even though we couldn't celebrate the sacraments together. And for them, that was a symbolic statement to say the church is not shutting down and the church's mission is continuing. And then they play that into a lot of other areas. I think particularly in terms of engaging young people, but I think engaging all people, as people saw the good works that the churches were doing And so as they continue their outreach to others, and so whether it was doing, the casserole collections for the hungry and doing it as a drive-through drop-off instead of doing it the ways at home, but to see a line of cars going through and people taking them safely out of the trunk of the car and doing everything you need to do to keep people healthy. But those visuals of the church is continuing to fill different elements of her mission inspired people to greater generosity. So one is, I think there has to be a mission, there has to be an activity on the church that is worthy of support. But another thing I would say, particularly for the young people, it's got to be easy to do. And so, and if it's not, if it's clunky, if it's a difficult system, if you don't have the text to give, but even if you just have the online giving, if it's not easy to do, people are going to get bored and walk away from it. And young people are going to have less of a tolerance for it, I think, than some of our older parishioners. So give them a reason to give because the mission is continuing, is compelling, and make it easy for them to give. And if those two things, and then you got to wrap all of that in the overall education about what's the right relationship with our possessions and the gifts that we received. And if you put that trifecta together, I think it can have an impact.
Yeah, our colleague Dan actually just chatted me on the back end and said, just a reminder to those who weren't able to join for the presentation last Friday and the Friday before, those are accessible. And so when we send out the link to this presentation, you'll be able to see that. There's some great ideas on reaching different audiences, either different cultural influences, different backgrounds, different areas. So look into those as well. Great. So, and Matt, I kind of want to just dig, my big takeaway and what I love about this is it's not just a matter of good finance, like having someone in your church who can deal with numbers. It's not just good money management. This is a bigger issue. Getting through COVID is about who we are as a church. It affects, just as you said, reaching out to the younger generation isn't just a matter of, hey, you're not giving, why can't you give? But showing them this ministry is life-giving. It can change your life, and you are changing the lives of others by being a part of it. And I think that's a gift to be here at the Center for Church Management, is that is our plumb line of this isn't just about management, it's about mission and ministry. So
there's a small thing on that, Chesley, too, that I would just throw out for people's consideration, because even within our physical churches, but also within our virtual presence in our physical churches, is how clear is the church's impact and the way that people are being sent out to transform the world. How clear is that in our physical places? So you go into some churches, and it's fascinating to me. I love the church that you go into, and you see all the pictures on the back wall of the people who are being sent on mission and who are being supported by that church in their missionary work, whatever it might be. But that's a clear statement that this church is not only about what happens here in this building. It's about how this community goes out and impacts the world. So how is that present either in your physical churches, on your virtual places, but those kind of things to say, hey, come be a part of this life-changing mission that we're doing here on behalf of Jesus Christ and the church is huge.
So I want to pivot, and in hope and optimism, we're looking forward to the light at the end of this tunnel. So we've talked a lot about how important it is to make your masses accessible, to do online streaming. We're just hypotheticals, but how is this going to change our Catholic experience into the future once we are safely able to gather for all people together as usual? What's the future of online streaming?
Yeah, so this is an opinion. I don't have any facts or data to back this up, but I think it's a huge opportunity. I think the fact that the church was able to shift to so much of an online presence in such a short period of time actually has the potential to be a real gift for us. And I think for many churches, one of the big obstacles is our growth historically has been driven by two things. It's been driven by birth rates, and it's been driven by immigration. And we know the birth rates, at least in the United States, are not going to be the driver of our growth. And so people are dying faster than they are being born, and life expectancies are shrinking, everything else. And immigration has been, again, there's still immigration happening. I don't know if we can count on that as a strategy for growth. So we have to shift to a growth that comes through evangelization and outreach for many of our churches. And I think what many places have found, or will find if they can be intentional about it going forward, is that having an online presence, having Mass or other services that are live streamed that are available for people, is a non-threatening on-ramp for people who are considering getting involved in our community. So I think that digital first is going to continue to be a place that will be where a lot of people will explore our church and visit our church for the first time. And I think the real challenge and strategy that many will have over this next year is how do we make it not stop at a digital experience, but how do we build the bridge from the digital experience that is an on-ramp to full, active, conscious participation in the life of our communities. I don't know what the solution is there, but I think a lot of creative minds, many people on this call and others, that will be one of our big challenges to survive, to figure out over this next year, is how do we connect the online, virtual to the real, for both people who are seekers, as well as for the people who are part of our community, who, and my wife's one of them. I mean, she's not physically, because of health reasons, not able to go and not comfortable going to mass in person. So how do we get her, when it's safe again, to be able to do that?
And in that spirit, I kind of hesitate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, this is the silver lining of COVID, is that it has said, here's a whole group of people that are only behind the screen. So how do you keep in touch with them, and how do you transition them into a deeper engagement? And that is who our youth are. They're behind the screen. And for years we've been saying, oh, that's just their generation. Like, they'll grow up and they'll get over it. But now we are faced with this very real problem of, this needs to be real, like
Yes.
real with a capital R, for no matter how old they are or how they reach out to us. So this could be an opportunity to really grow into a ministerial evangelizing church in a new level. I think that's exciting.
Well, that might be my closing line. And I know Dan has to shut off the recording. My closing line for all of you is, there's been great pain, there's been great suffering, there's been great trial during this COVID pandemic, and there will be more. We know it's not done. There will be more for many, many months. But fortunately, as Christians, we know that great things can come out of great pain and suffering and great trials, and that we are an Easter people. We're not a Good Friday people. So I think our challenge is to kind of, how do we continue to look to the light and then share that light with others? And it's possible, and it's doable. And as you do it, share it with your friends at the Center for Church Management, and we'll go out and share it with thousands of others.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, share your successes and your trials with us, because we want to be a part of that journey and to share it with others. So with that, I think that definitely brings us to the 2:00 Eastern time hour. So thank you. It's been so great to see so many of you, some new friends, some familiar faces. We will stay on, and I think what we're going to do is continue. And I think Dan will allow you to actually speak for yourself if you'd like to, or feel free to put any questions in the chat box. Again, we're going to turn off the recording and do a soft close, but feel free to stay with us if you have any thoughts. And it might not just need to be a question. Maybe you have a comment or a thought about something that you've heard and you'd like to share.